Right then, everybody ready? Well, welcome to Doctor Who of Disability. Wait a minute. It should be Dr. Me. I know who I am. I'm the doctor. You can call me the doctor. Everybody calls me the doctor. Even I call me the doctor. I don't know why. Now, most people at first would think that all my adventures are more of a straightforward, cause to effect, good versus evil scenario, but actually from a non-linear, non-subjective vantage point, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly. Thank you. So, what am I talking about? Well, I don't know what I'm talking about just yet. Let me just, let's take a look at a few examples, shall we? Now, one time I encountered the Cripping. Now, these are creatures that adapt depending on whatever species they conquered first. Now, you see? They also, I don't know how they do this, but at one point they actually managed to assume the disguise of ordinary human beings, and they tricked a bunch of school kids into helping them to crack the universal code. Oof, imagine what you could do if you did that. Now, this here is a plasma ball. Oh, even though she looks like a perfectly ordinary human being, she is not, I assure you, an ordinary human being. Plasma balls live exclusively on blood, preferably human blood. I don't know what's so tasty about human blood compared to everybody else, but that's neither here nor there. Although, if you ask me, if I had known she was so desperate for blood that she'd actually go after me, I would have just fixed her a Bloody Mary and had it over with. Don't think. I promise you, do not think. This is very important. Do not think. The weeping angels are creatures that exist. They've existed longer than the universe itself. And they are quantum locked. Silent assassins, they used to be called. One look and you're dead. They can't even look at each other. That's why they hold their hands over their faces. They can't look at each other. Otherwise, they would kill one another. It's suicidal. And the Cybermen, you wouldn't believe it, but the Cybermen were actually human beings at one point. Their brains were completely removed from their heads, placed inside robotic suits of armor. They can't think, they can't feel, they can't get older. They have been programmed to think exclusively on logic rather than emotion. Does that remind you of anyone? But never mind. The Cybermen are so determined to survive. So determined to survive that they'll take anybody. And they're so convinced that the way they're living right now is the way anybody should live. Ooh. You do not want to cross a Dalek. Daleks are pure evil. They're pure... I shouldn't... What's the matter with me? Daleks are not pure evil. They just can't feel. Much like the Cybermen, they can't feel. They are pure hatred. That's all they've been molded to feel. You can't reason with them. All they want to do is destroy. I mean, one time I actually tried to reason with a Dalek. He came up to me and I said to him, "Oh, please, can't we please just come to a compromise?" And he said, "Daleks have no concept of compromise. Exterminate!" And then I ran. No shame in mine. And then I encountered the Silence, and no, I am not talking about Simon and Garfunkel here. The Silence, and you know what? I still don't understand why they call the Silence, because despite the fact that they don't have mouths, as you can plainly see, you can still hear them talking. It kind of defeats the purpose of calling them the Silence, but I guess the reason they're called the Silence is because as soon as you see them, you don't remember that you've seen them. Which makes it all the more easy to trick you and manipulate you into getting what you want. Cheaters. Now, a couple of runners up here. The Master. We used to be good friends, he and I don't know. Nobody knows exactly what happened to the Master. he looked into the time vortex as a young boy, and that was the start of madness. And then, somehow or other, somebody planted a perpetual sound of beating drums in his head. And then, he died. I tried to tell him to regenerate, but he wouldn't do it. He died, and then somebody brought him back to life. But he was only half alive. He was only half alive. Now, I envied him in a way, because he could shoot these cool-looking lightning bolts out of his hands because he wasn't completely formed, but he also had a very ravenous appetite that could never be finished. Now, in the pond, I didn't fight her. She was one of my closest companions, but unlike most of the other companions that I had, I met her when she was very young, and then I took off for 5 minutes, what I thought was 5 minutes. It turned out to be years and years. And in the time that I was gone, she came to think, she tried to tell everybody that she met a dashing young man in a box, but no one would believe her because there wasn't a man in a box to prove that she saw that man in the box. So everybody thought she was going crazy, and they gave her psychiatry trips and all kinds of things. If only I showed up a little bit sooner, I could have helped her. So where am I going with all this? I don't know. Where am I going with all this? Well, that's fine. That's fine. Now you heard me say the Creatanes were determined to solve the universal code. The Cybermen, they can't think, they want everybody to be exactly like them. The Daleks are nothing but hate, they just want to destroy everything. Why? Well, as I said before, you would think at face value that that it's just good versus evil, nothing more. But really, the thing is, they do it that way because they just can't do it any other way. And you honestly can't hardly blame them for that. If only the Daleks could feel something more than just hate, they probably wouldn't want to destroy everything. If the Cybermen were able to think logically, they would be able to stop and say, well, what if somebody doesn't want to be a Cyberman? They'd be able to stop and say, okay, I'll let you go about your business, but they can't. They can only think about what is best for their own race, nothing more. So, with all of these characters, that is why, no matter who I encounter in my travels, I can never just come forward and just obliterate them, shove them aside, or what have you, because I know that most of the time they're not thinking of their own accord. They are doing only what they have been programmed to do. And if I'm not mistaken, there's quite a few people in this world that do things that people consider abnormal, but no one seems to be able to understand that it's not that they are deliberately trying to hurt anyone. It's not that they're trying to be a problem. They're just different. They're just different. So, any questions?
What did you think of your encounter? What did you think of your encounter with Van Gogh?
He's one of my favorite artists, you know. It was very difficult encountering him for the first time because I knew going into it that he was going to commit suicide at some point in his life. Thankfully, I didn't have to see him chop off his own ear. And unfortunately, unlike me, he can't regenerate himself, so he couldn't grow it back. But if anything, I thought the most important thing of all was to take the time to understand him and hopefully show him a little ray of light that one day people would stop laughing at him and learn to see him as a real artist who would make a very big difference in the future. I couldn't stop him killing himself, but it felt good to do something for him just the same.
questions for the doctor? Bueller? Overall, how do you feel that your show, do you feel that the portrayals of disability, both visible and invisible, is positive or negative?
I have to think it's positive. Like I said, every single one of my tales ends with me taking the time to not only resolve the situation, but also to reveal, especially to my companions, that sometimes there is more to the universe than meets the eye. And if anything, I hope that people can understand that before you can jump to any conclusions about anyone, you have to stop and think, because there may be more to it than you know. And as history has shown, there have been plenty of times when people don't take the time to understand one another, and as a result, all you get is death, destruction, and despair. And I think we've had about enough of that.
Do you think that Amy Pond's experiences as a child being labeled crazy influenced her later on?
Oh, unquestionably. If only that TARDIS hadn't been acting up that day, I probably would have been back 5 minutes later like I promised, but instead it turned out to be well over 10 years later. Now, I know that she wasn't crazy, you know that she wasn't crazy, but everybody else thought she was crazy because she couldn't prove her claim. So, I imagine that, yes, I think it does. I think there was a part of her that desperately wanted to be able to see me again so she could show everybody that I really did come to see her. And but yes, I think it very much did influence the way she was when she grew up. And yes.
Do you think that you or any of your past incarnations have shown any kinds of disability yourself?
Who knows? Who knows? Okay, just kidding, of course. There's a part of me that thinks that with every regeneration, I seem to gain something I didn't have before, and I think, especially early on, I had a very hard time understanding people. I came to love ordinary people, but I just didn't always understand them, and I think I was so convinced that everything that I was, everything I had learned was exactly the way to go, and I think only after taking a couple of beatings here and there and having to shed my skin and grow new limbs, did I finally realize that I needed to look deeper. So, unquestionably, yes, I'm not ashamed to admit it.
Anyone else?
So what qualities do neurotypical people need to cultivate so that they become less judgmental? Because I hear you saying, don't write anyone off without ample evidence. So is it tolerance or empathy, or what do we need to encourage in the characteristics of people who are judgmental?
Very good question. I would say all of the above. As I said before, if I wanted to, I could kill off the entire population of Daleks. I could just destroy every single Cyberman. I could if I didn't want to go that far, I could at least, before anything that I encountered says a word, I could just boot them off the scene. But I can't. I just can't do that. So I would very much encourage everyone else to as well. Before you jump to conclusions about anyone, I can say stop, think about who they are, take the time to think about what they're doing, consider the possibility, consider the reason why they do it, and then make your decision. So yes, it's all about tolerance and empathy and just taking the time to stop and think before you act.
I'd just like to bring up that you did indeed kill, or at least you thought you killed off the Daleks during the last battle of the Great Time War. So are you speaking from a place of, learning from past experience when you tell people not to judge?
Oh, you had to bring that up. No, really, you're right. I confess, I didn't want to do what I did, but I realized that many, many more lives were going to be at stake if I didn't do something, and that's why the Great Time War turned out the way it did. Yes, I am speaking from past experiences, very much so. Trust me on this.
Hi, yeah, I have a question about the problematic species. So I think the only time that I can think of where problematic species wasn't given the option of either being relocated or being destroyed was in the storyline involving the reptilian race, where it was more of an agreement to coexist. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, or if you thought that there should be more, I guess, kind of middle ground solutions like that in your future adventures.
Well, let me start by saying normal is a state of mind. And for everybody, that definition of normal is going to be different. So, yes, I do remember the reptilian race. I liked them a lot. I thought if only we could learn to work together, imagine the technological advances we could do. But apparently we're not quite so ready for that yet, but I would encourage for the future. I would encourage that everyone remember that normal has absolutely no intrinsic value whatsoever. It's all according to everybody. So we need to stop thinking about what is, quote, normal and start thinking about what's natural. If something exists in nature, that means that it's natural, and no amount of saying that, and no amount of labeling or what have you is going to change that. And that doesn't just go for different species, that goes for different people of different nationalities, sexual orientation, and what have you. So yes, I would say I learned a lot from that experience, and I think everybody else needs to as well, or else we will never have peace on this planet.
Okay, can we give a round of applause to that? Thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll be around afterwards to answer any questions.
For a little while.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed that. So there's lunch now. People can break for their own lunch to go do.
There's some leftover food out here.
Okay, there is leftover food.
People should eat it.
Lunch is on your own though, so thank you.
Do you want to get lunch? Do you want to do something?
You need food? Are we doing